Good evening. Tonight's topic is going to be if our democracies are in danger. And the reason why I choose this topic was we have seen now the developments in Russia. I wouldn't say that they started out with a democracy in 1990-91, but it kind of tried to move into this direction. And now, pretty much since 2010, it has gone in the opposite direction. And it seems to be getting worse. There is a growing affection with populism, not just in Russia or in the Ukraine, where we have seen nationalism to various degrees, or in Europe or here in the United States. I just want to mention the insurrection on January 6th, and also the general direction changes. Say we talk here in the United States about the Democratic Party and the Republicans, that they have drifted apart, like they have never really been together, but the ideologies in both parties were never before, I wouldn't call them extreme, but it is getting to that point, especially when you're politically more in the middle. And what really was the last draw on this was the Supreme Court leak, which happened here. And I wanted to point this out. I do not want to have a discussion on this channel now about whether to have abortions or not abortions, or what kind of abortions, if abortions, and none of this stuff. There's other people out there more suitable to explain this. Neither do I want to analyze the rulings from the Supreme Court in 1973, Roe versus Wade, or from what we know now is a draft of what is coming here, where Roe versus Wade might be overturned. I forgot now the case citation exactly for this case, which is pending, but that is basically at the heart of it. What I wanted to look at is the composition of the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court justices and their political affiliations, and how they didn't really vote. Well, they did vote, or when they come to the opinions, when they form their opinions in that process on how they actually sided, on which side, concurrent or descending. And in the in the original Roe versus Wade case, I looked up the records on this. We had 9 justices, and the court was split 7-2. 7 judges concurrent with the opinion, 2 descending. Let's take a look at the 2 who actually descended. One was Rehnquist, and the other one was, I forgot his name now, but it is really not that important. One was a Democrat and one was a Republican. So we had both parties, 2 people each, 1 person each, on the Supreme Court, which descended. They were not in favor of the opinion of the majority, or they did not agree with the opinion of the majority of the court. The composition of the majority was 4 Democrats and 3 Republicans. So as we can see, this was not just the Democrats' opinion at that time in 1973, who concurred with the majority opinion that the abortions are basically protected. And what they did actually is, that's an important part, is they had that under the Constitution of personal privacy protection. So they didn't say it was correct to have abortion. That it said that topic is personal matter and that is protected under the Constitution of the United States after the personal privacy protection of the amendments or in the amendments. Now, with what we're looking at now is that we have 5 Republicans, or 4 Republicans, 5 Republicans, opinion and concurrent. We have 3 Democrats dissenting, and we have Roberts, who is neither in favor of either one of the two. And he may write his own dissent in there from the majority. If these 5 judges gonna vote the way they have voted, and that was part of this draft paper or the draft opinion, then they're gonna overturn Roe versus Wade. And that is the thing now here, is when we're looking at the political affiliation of the judges. Roberts is also a Republican, but he is a Republican which was appointed by George Bush in the 2000s. And he is more in line with ruling or with forming opinions the way the Supreme Court was in 1973 when Roe versus Wade was first decided. And with this, we have now a politically segregated court. Neither one of the Republicans dissented, except for Roberts, but he doesn't agree with the way the 3 Democrats are dissenting on this. And we have no Democrat who is in favor of overturning Roe versus Wade. And there is a clear change in our society happening, that these younger judges are interpreting law so differently than their previous generations, which would be next year 50 years ago, where these judges in 1973 were able to form opinions outside party lines, where they looked at the laws and Constitution and they argued this among themselves. Now we have something different, is that the law is interpreted among a party ideology. And this is something which is really, really scary. But this is something Mitch McConnell has basically instigated over since he became a member. I think he first was a member of the House and then he became a senator. And he has formed this, the Federalist Society, and I've read this, I'm subscribed to this stuff just out of interest to follow these things. It is not my political environment. I would conduct it. I'm a libertarian. And as a libertarian, I could not agree with these things as what they're doing at the moment. That's what I have to say to it from my point of view, but that's not the issue. The issue is the polarization, that our institutions are getting polarized, not anymore by legal skills and the ability to interpret laws correctly, but by an interpretation based on a party affiliation, based on a belief system. And this is now where we're getting into this, that we're basically dissolving or abolishing democracy. And you have this now on both sides. The Democrats are probably as bad as the Republicans. Now, the issue here at hand now, the way the majority opinion is going, is that they are stating that the states have an exclusive right to this, which overrules the right of the individual to privacy granted by the Constitution. And that may be so. But this is something they would have argued back then already, I'm pretty sure, in 1973, but they didn't. They had a different value and a different understanding of the Constitution. Now, with this being said, is we have to remember in the 2000s that the Republicans, after 9/11, were in favor of the Real ID Act. And you probably, if you have had to renew your driver's license or you were trying to get a driver's license or state ID, you had to suddenly procure a whole bunch of documents you never had to procure before, from birth certificate or immigration papers and this, that, and the other thing. And it had to be verified, and they scan this, and that goes over in real time and all of this stuff. This is that Nazi state what we're basically having now. And interestingly enough, the Democrats back in the 2000s first argued that the issuance of state IDs and state driver's licenses was a state issue, not a federal issue. But yet, the Republicans used 9/11 as an argumentative because the hijackers had boarded the airplanes with Florida issued driver's licenses. Now, if this was the case, instead of saying, well, we really don't need to take the states right away for issuing or determining how to issue driver's licenses, the federal government could have decided to introduce a federal ID. You have a passport already, you can also then issue a federal ID where you can check all of the stuff for people who want to board an airplane and leave the states independent in that decision. But that wasn't done. So here we're having now the Supreme Court saying the states have to have more say. But on the driver's licenses, when it came to national security, the same people said the states cannot determine this if this is safe enough for us as a country. So this is how mixed up this whole thing is, and this is a big thing in the Republican Party. And the interesting part in this was they bought, with the Real ID Act, the Republicans bought the Democrats' votes by giving them, I think it was a $500 million or something like this for the tsunami aid and a few other, pork things. So that's how they got the vote for it. And then the Democrats, who were first concerned about the states' rights and the ability of the states to decide the state matter, was blown out the window. So this is how easily all of this can be bent forwards and backwards, in total disregard of what the founding fathers had said about the Constitution, and so far and so on. And this goes further into the issue with guns, gun licensing, and everything else what comes with it. The Constitution protects gun ownership. But yet we're having both parties, in more or less cases, basically implementing a ID system. First of all, you have Republican states who are right there with it. Kansas is one of them. They carry concealed permit and this and that and the other thing. Then you need a federal gun license dealership if you want to sell and trade arms. And now New York wants to have this, that you cannot sell your guns privately anymore if you have a collection and that sort of stuff. This is all where we're starting to abandon democracy. A lot of this stuff has originated from the religious right. A lot of the other stuff, like with gun control, comes out of the left wing, Democratic left wing area. So we're having now two activist groups or multiple activist groups on both sides squeezing or pushing their ideas onto the rest of the population. Now, I'm totally in tune with people want to worship the way they want to worship it, then they should do this and should be able to do it. But I would expect from those people also not to tell me on how I have to live my life, or what I should do and what I should not do, because I'm not teaching you or telling you how to pray. If I want to worship Satan, then I should have the same right if you want to worship a God or your God, that I can worship Satan. It works in both ways. And where we're getting to a point where one side gets the say of what other people can and cannot do. This goes also into the gender issues, what we're talking about, which is one of their favorite topics on the left. In a libertarian society, the person who worships are free to worship however they wish to worship. On the other hand, is that person who worships the way they want to worship are not telling me what I have to do and what I don't have to do. And this is how we're going to live as a free and democratic society. If it comes to that point that one group of people starts to determining on how other people have to live and what they need to do, that is going to create a lot of problems. And that's what I'm seeing here. And this is something which has developed. It kind of originated a little bit there in the 90s with Bill Clinton in this Monica Lewinsky thing, even though the Republicans said it wasn't about the sex they had in the Oval Office, it was because he lied about it. But of course, the religious people, they were probably more appalled by it, of having their president do something which they may not even would do in a bedroom. So this kind of festered around it, and it came. And by the election, and this is part of when George Bush was elected, with the chats and the Supreme Court, the dangling chats, and the Supreme Court had to decide of who's going to be president. That was basically the moment the United States had lost the democracy, or this was the beginning of the downfall of our democracy here, of our way where we can live as free people. That is my opinion. I was very aghast about this whole process with George Bush. You can like him, you cannot like him. I did not think a lot of him as a politician. I don't know, as a person, he might be an all right guy, But as a politician, his politics and what he went with in a lot of ways, I did not agree with. And the other thing is, I had mentioned 9/11 before, is Bill Clinton knew about the entire 9/11. We had the first bombing there in 1993. It was, 93, January 93, where they drove the truck into the parking garage. I was on West Houston Street in Manhattan when that bomb went off, and I could see the smoke coming up. I was at a friend's place, and we were watching. We could see down there, we were maybe 10 blocks away, and we could see the smoke coming off. This was the first bombing in 1993, and then nothing but police and fire and everything else. And we looked at this, and we said, this is going to be more. There's going to be more like this coming. And we were right, unfortunately. And then 8 years later, or 8.5 years later, both buildings came down. And ever since 93, Clinton was already in office at that point. They knew in Washington, with Al-Qaeda and with, what was his name now, that crazy guy there, Osama bin Laden. Then they had the bombings where these guys ran boats with ammunition or explosives into a Navy ship in the Gulf. And that exploded, and it caused tragedy. And there were opportunities to have been Osama bin Laden taken out while Clinton was in office. So when 2001 happened, and I was living in Hawaii at the time, I knew, I had an instinct, I had just a feeling about this, and I said that Bush could have prevented this. And I still believe this today. But, and this is based too then, as we later knew, was the NSA came about. The whole secretive court system where, they can spy on you even though they say they're not going to spy on U.S. citizens. The entire internet traffic is basically monitored and everything and recorded to a certain extent. This is where we lost all our freedoms. And this could have been prevented. So this is why we have to look at this, in my opinion, that America's down or move away from democracy had started with the election of George Bush, and more so the ruling of the Supreme Court at that time, rather than votes. Now, I don't want to go into this, and the question is whether or not the elections were rigged this time. All I'm going to tell you is I've lived in New York for quite a few years, and I'm familiar with the democratic machine there, what it was, what characters used to be in New York, even in the 90s or late 80s when I was there. John Gotti was alive and out of jail. And those guys, there were hardcore union guys out there. I knew a few of the union guys out of Brooklyn where I was living. They were my neighbors. They made no bones about this, that this was rigged. And you couldn't get elected unless you knew that guy. You couldn't run for office. You couldn't run for the primaries and that sort of stuff. So there has always been, especially on the Democratic side, a lot of mechanisms in place which prevented a free election as what we would consider normally under a free, election. But it was New York City. And it was my understanding that these things were basically the same in Chicago and Atlanta, in the big cities, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Miami, New Orleans, all of those big, Los Angeles, all of those big democratic cities. They had their machine going there. You couldn't run just to be a council member in some neighborhood over there unless you knew that guy or the other guy, and that guy gave his blessings for you to be in that position, and then maybe you had to give him a contract and that sort of stuff. That I know firsthand because I've known the actors, the people in it, who orchestrated this stuff. From where I lived, these were my neighbors, not my associates. It's nothing I would normally get involved with, but people in the neighborhood, and you get to talk and you get to know things. There's not to judge something. So knowing that fact, I would say it is quite possible that this election was rigged, especially with mail-in ballots, because you really don't know where those ballots came from. Once they're mailed in, there is no more trace on it and who actually sent it, even though they have a barcode on there, so they're supposedly, but this is a free election. And normally on the ballot, there is no name attached to it whatsoever. That's all what I'm telling you. That's all what I'm saying, but I had to say this. The other thing is here in Kansas, if it comes to Trump, Trump did not win the primary in Kansas in 2016. It was Ted Cruz from Texas who won. So the Kansas Republican had a slightly different idea of, what is acceptable to them or what they want to see as a Republican agenda. But we had 3 or 4 candidates running in the primary, which means that the first one got 30%, 20%, and so far. In the end, the Republicans, they will vote for whoever is going to be the winner in the primary, even though they don't like him too much, unless it goes so far out of hand, and then they're going to become a swing voter or they don't go vote. And then when they don't go vote, that's when you have the Democrats usually get elected in these kind of issues. The voter participation is pretty low. And we're seeing a similar pattern now in Ohio. I think Trump's candidate there got 31%, and then there were 3 other ones. That means 70% did not vote out of the Republican basis. for the Trump candidate, but he's now the candidate for the state. And now the question comes, how do the 70% Republicans who voted for the other primary candidates they had are going to vote? Are they going to vote for Trump's guy? Are they going to stay home and don't vote at all? Or are they actually going to swing and vote for the Democrat? And that is the big question we cannot answer. At this point, we will just have to wait and see. I hope I have seen similar issues about our democracies. Europe followed this pretty closely too. They still like to boast they have democracies, but we have now popularized democracies which live off the internet, of sensationalism. As more sensational it is, as more people are going to watch it. That is the big thing in this. So any person who talks like the way I talk out of a objective angle usually will get minimal views. YouTube isn't interested in it to promote it a lot because it is too neutral or too objective. They like videos, for instance, if we take this platform here, where people which have sensational news or stories, that attracts the viewer. And that's how they're scoring. So as more bolder, as more outspoken it is more crazy it actually is more likely you're going to have viewers and hits and likes and subscriptions. That is the dangerous move which has accompanied this whole political thing. So these two, the populists, in interaction with sensationalism packaged in the right way, will get this thing going. And if we're going to drift any further apart as a society and we leave the middle out, we're probably going to wind up in some form of confrontation. And it is in this confrontation that we can no longer conduct business where every person actually is going to be able to make money, either as having their own company, running their company, or as an employee where you work at a company which pays you a good job, a decent wage, so you have a good living. This is something we're in the process of sacrificing. That ideologies and populism is going to erode our economic foundation in this country and the democracy which that free market needs. It's a free market, not a controlled market. And we're getting to a more and more controlled environment where religious groups say on one hand, you shouldn't go to this restaurant because of that, where you have the other side saying you shouldn't buy from that business because they do this and that, or they don't do this and that. And now you're actually crippling your economy. The economy we had, our standard of living, is directly affected by this. And we're seeing it now in the market. We're seeing it with the government, with the indebtedness of the government, and everything else that comes with it. This is a declining path we have been taking for quite some time. And at one point or another, we have to think about this. I hope there's reasonable people out there and think, is this really the right way to go? Is this really good to support populism, sensationalism, extremism to a certain extent? A Christian society is not going to save our country. There's no question about it. Christianity hasn't saved anything. That's a fact. Democracy has been able and a constitutional country has been able to accelerate people under God. You can say this, you can take that God, however your God is, that is up to the individual. That was on my mind here for quite a few days, and I hope you were able to get something out of my sharing here tonight, my thoughts and how I look at the stuff. And I hope that we're going to be going in a different direction. I don't think it is going to go with the Republicans, and I don't think it will work with the Democrats. A third party would have to come in and mix this thing up to get both sides back onto the carpet, out of their la-la land of what they think, of what that ought to be and what it is not. And with that, you have a good night.